Okay guys, so in this video we're gonna walk through sending direct messages between our different clients, so let's get into it. So basically what we've gone for here is that we have a direct messages option here where we've started a conversation with somebody on, well, who's connected to our application. And as we can see here, we can actually send messages between ourselves and this other person. So this person can send something to us and hey, I can send something back, which is great, but we've also added support for changing channels so we can actually talk to different people. And like basically the idea here is to just support being able, like, because that's natural, right? We need to be able to support talking to different people and sending direct messages to different people. And as I'm currently just supporting here talking to myself, but I can also add people that I want to converse with. So I can say direct message here, and I can select Mr. Bar here, which is myself at this point since I'm logged in as Bar. I can send like different messages to this person, and then I can go back and talk to the original individual that I was talking to. And in order to support this, we've also had to basically add a little bit of routing as well, because now that we have multiple channels, we need to be able to distinguish which channel are we on, so that if I actually refresh this page here, I need to actually land in the conversation that I was having at this point in time. And that's being achieved using the anchor tag here. So basically what I'm doing is that I am linking between different pages here. As you can see, the URL is actually changing, and if I then use my browser, like I have the ability to actually go back and forth just using the browser's back and forth functionality, because I'm actually changing the route now when I'm going between pages. And that's this story became kind of big because we needed to basically implement both routing and like having the support for creating a channel, and then of course sending direct messages and all that good stuff. So we're gonna touch on all of that, but we're gonna have to, yeah, just bear with me because there's quite a lot of stuff to cover. Another thing that we should have a look at is basically that if I go and drop my database now, and I refresh these pages though, so we don't have a state anymore now. We also, of course, need to support the ability to not just have existing users, but we also have to support creating a new direct messages channel. So if I go to this user here and I start conversing with myself, basically, I start a conversation here, and then this other user, Bar, goes and says, hey, I want to talk to Foo, and starts typing something like this, like that. We notice now that I actually got Bar as a part of my list here, and I can go in and I can start conversing back and forth, and yeah, that's also supported, and we will touch on that as well, of course. So there is a ton of stuff that has changed. Like most of this stuff here is something I've just put into staging, or other, like we don't have to touch on all of this because I did actually move around. I shifted around some code in order to just be able, like we kind of just structured things a little bit as well here. We can just have a brief look here where I added this app directory where I just moved a bunch of files around a little bit. So I don't think we need to look at all of this. We'll just focus on what is more essential than that, I would say. So first and foremost, we'll see here that the app.js file has changed quite a bit. The most outstanding things that have changed is that we now need to support different rooms, because originally, as we remember, we only had a single socket communication channel, which was this thing here, where basically whenever anybody sent a connection request or started typing or did anything, they all talked on the same socket or the same channel. That won't do anymore because we want to be able to talk privately between ourselves, or being able to go into so-called different rooms. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, but I also wanted to show that I've also refactored quite a bit of the routes now, because I kind of felt that it was kind of getting a little bit too big. So let's just look very briefly at that. So we see here that I've moved most of the routes, like just the standard HTTP routes, into their own routes, route directories basically. So I'm just grabbing the routes from an external module now. Let's actually look at that. So I have this little index.js file, which is just basically, well, we can actually look at that very quickly. So the routes are now living in this little directory here, and all I've done is basically to move all of the routing that was in the same file originally in the app.js file into these separate the separate directory with these separate files, so that we can keep our app.js file a little bit smaller, because it gets to be a little bit of a hassle when there's too much code in the same file. So let's just look at the diff here for just a moment. So if we have a look at the main thing that's changed here, so we see that we now actually have a few new, we have two outstanding things that have changed, and that is that we have an init and then we have a first direct message. And basically the idea here is that when you connect, when there's a socket connection, in other words, a client connects to the server, we need now to not just generally connect to everything, we need to actually initialize connecting to all the rooms that this person is part of. And that's what's happening here. As you could see here in the diff, originally this init didn't exist because we only had a general connection. So we created one socket, and that socket would just communicate to all the other sockets. But that's not what we want anymore. We want the socket to join all of the basically we want to join our own session, like our own our own room. The reason why we want to join our own room is because when a user starts sending us a direct message for the very first time, they need a way to just say that, hey, I want to talk to that person, I want to send that person a message, so that, as we saw earlier, that the name of that person actually appears in the direct messages list. And that's what's happening here. So you can see here that basically I'm sending a message here with my first direct messages, or with my first direct message, and I grab the user ID and the channel ID of this basically, and then I send to that user ID, which that I just emit this message saying that, hey, this is a first direct message and this is the channel ID that I want that person now to connect to, because I've just added this person to this channel and I now want to talk to that person. So that's what's happening here. And then we grab all of the channels which this person is a member of, and we can actually, let's actually look at that immediately, because it gets a little bit, there is quite a lot of stuff that has changed, but let's just look at this quickly. So basically what I'm going to do now, instead of getting all the channels in the entire database, I'm just going to get the channels that this person is a part of, so that we can just, connect to each of those. Cool. And then we simply loop through all of the channels and we join each of the channel rooms, all like the IDs of each channel. And that's about it, really. The rest of this is very simple, where, okay, so instead of broadcasting to all the channels, we simply send the the started typing and all of these events to the appropriate channel, and the client is going to tell us, as we can see here, okay, who is the user who's doing the typing and what channel ID should I broadcast this to. And yeah, that's about it, really. And the same thing goes for the message here, where we're simply, instead of sending to everybody that somebody sent the message, we send it to a specific channel. Cool. So the channel model has updated a little bit, and we can see here now that we have two new fields that are of relevancy. We have a type of a channel, because now we need to distinguish, we need now to separate a regular channel from a direct messages channel, because they have different behavior. And then we added something called a fingerprint, and the basic idea of a fingerprint is that we need a way for the user to to create a unique selector for a channel. Because if two users, let's say that Fu and Bar are going to talk to each other, and Fu creates a channel, and the way that Slack works is basically that it takes the username of each individual in a direct messages conference and creates a name from that. The problem is that if Fu creates a message or creates a channel, starts directly talking to somebody else, then that other person then tries to do that back, the name is never gonna, it's not gonna stay unique. The name is going to be different every time depending on who's in the channel. And in order for us to know whether or not the channel has already been created, we need to create a unique selector that represents basically represents the channel, it's the channel name in a predictable way, because the name may be slightly different depending on who is creating the channel. But if the same people are always in that channel, or when that channel is created, we need to create a fingerprint for it, so we know that, all right, this channel already exists. So instead of creating a new one, which basically is the same channel but with a slightly different name, we will create a fingerprint. And we'll touch on in just a moment how to create this fingerprint. So basically we updated this little channel service here, and as we can see here, the fingerprint logic is here. So let's actually have a little bit of a look on the fingerprint logic. So the name is going to just be a comma separated list of a comma separated string of all the people who are within the channel, or it could be that, depending, at least for a direct message, that's what's going to happen. So what we want to do now is that we want to split out each and every part of that string. Then we want to sort it by just make sure that everything is sorted in an alphabetic order. And then we want to join it. So basically what we're going to do is that we're going to take all of the username, we're going to split them into an array, sort them by order, and then join everything together, and then we're going to base64 encode that. And that way we can always be sure that this is going to be the exact same fingerprint for for anybody who wants to create this same channel. So it doesn't matter who creates the channel. If it's the same users in the channel when that channel is created, we know that it's the same, we know it's the same channel. So then what we're going to do is that we're simply going to find, or attempt to find, somebody who has that fingerprint. Because remember, we can't use the username and we don't know the user ID when we want to create a channel. We have no idea. The fingerprint is the only way for us to know whether or not the channel already exists. And if we already have the channel, we will simply return that channel instead of creating a new one. That way we can simply allow a user to do this thing here where, all right, I want to create another direct message, I want to send it to bar, and unless we have that fingerprint, I will simply create new channels every single time I try to do that. And that's not what we want. We want the user to just, hey, you try to create a channel that already exists. Here is that already existing channel, right? So then I changed a little bit with the current user view. So a user view, if we have a look at the original user view here, it used to be just a function and now it's a class. And the reason for that is because we want to separate the information that we're sending, because we're sending user information. And what we want now is to be able to separate just a regular user from the user who is actually using the application. And so we use a little bit of object-oriented programming here. And we extend the user view and add one field, which is just going to be last visited channel ID, because, well, for a user who is, for the current user, we need to know what the last channel they visited was, but they shouldn't know what of the people using our application, the ID of the thing that they last visited. Cool, so the user model was a slight update here, because now we don't just store the name anymore, because now we're actually interested in the ID of the channel. So a slight change there. And then we changed a few things. We added a function called getCurrentUserView here, a little bit of refactoring. And basically all we did here was that, as we can see, I added a little bit of validation logic to create users. So we're simply going to check if there is a user with that and with the provided name, and if there is, we're simply going to throw an error instead. And getCurrentUserView is simply going to be, all right, we're going to try to find a user, and then we're simply going to return the current user view to the consumer of this little function, this little call here. And that we already looked at, and then we can have a slight look at the application that has been quite updated as well. So they basically refactored this quite, as we can see, quite extensively. And the idea here is basically that I've moved most of this logic that we had here earlier, where we initialized the state of the application, into my router. And we will look at the router in just a moment, but that's where it gets, hopefully we can follow along here, because this is going to get a little bit complicated but I hope it's still going to be durable for us. And we can endure this. Anywho, so basically what we're going to do here is that instead of doing all the bootstrapping code that we did earlier, we've moved all that into our router. So right now all we have to do is to basically get the user, that check that we are logged in, get that user, set that user in our store, and then we want to initialize ourselves. And as we saw earlier, what's going to happen now is that when the page loads, we are simply going to use our user ID, send that over the socket, and initialize all of the chat rooms that we are part of. And then we load the modules, and we grab the routes, and then we have this thing called socket channels, which is just this little thing here, which we're going to do deep dive into in just a moment, where I've basically just moved all of the channels for the sockets into a separate module. And then we're going to check if the user has a last visited channel. If we do have that, we're going to reroute ourselves to this channels endpoint here, or this route here. And otherwise, we're simply going to grab all the channels and do the bootstrapping here, because, hey, we should have a last visited channels, but for now we're just going to ignore it if we don't. Anywho, let's have a look at the sockets channel here. So this started typing and the stop typing is pretty much the same as previously, and the same thing goes for my message, but we see here that first direct message is a little bit new, where basically if there is somebody who sends us a first direct message, or somebody tries to start a direct messages conference with us, we will grab the channel ID, we're going to get that channel, and then we're going to wrap it in a channel, like just a channel model, so that we have on the client side. And then we're going to add that channel into our list of channels, and then we're going to dispatch the init event again, because now we've been invited to a new channel, therefore we need to join that channel when somebody actually requests it, so that we can receive messages on that channel from the person who's actually sending things. Right, so that's the basics of this, and then I added a little bit of code down here for the messages, as we can see here, where basically now when somebody sends a message, we're simply going to check if the message is to the current channel, because if it's in the current channel, I simply want to add the incoming message, otherwise we're simply going to ignore it. Later on we might add that there's like a typing indicator on the channel that people are sending messages to that I'm not currently looking at. So if if somebody starts typing here, there might be an indicator, or if there's a message that comes in that's new, there might be an indicator here saying that, oh yeah, there's a new message for you, or something of that nature. But for now we're going to keep it simple. So let's have a little bit of a look at our router, or our routes file, basically where we do the client-side routing. So basically we do a bunch of imports here, and then we declare our routes. So we've created a route that is called channel/channel ID, and it takes in a bunch of parameters, and when somebody actually goes to this route, we reinitialize, or we just create an init, and then we reset the typing users. And the reason why we want to do this is because if, let's say for the sake of argument, I'm typing something like that, and let's see here, if I go to this thing here, I type something, and I type something back, we will see that bar is now typing, and if I move over to a new channel, I want that typing to stop. That's basically what this is. It's simply going to reset the typing, like you just remove the state that, hey, somebody's typing to me when I go to a new channel. So then we are going to grab the channel IDs, we're going to get all of the channels, and then we're going to just loop through them and create channel objects from this. And that changed a little bit. We can actually look at that real quickly. So let's open this up. So basically, when we create a new client-side channels model, all we're going to do is that we're going to grab the properties and the current user. And the reason why we want the current user is because when we create the channel name, we want to do a little bit of formatting, because remember, when a user creates a direct message, the name of that user within, as Slack works today, is going to be the concatenation of each name separated by a comma. But when there's only 2 users in the channel, we don't want to show the comma, we just want to show the person who sent the message, in other words, or who started the channel. That's why you're seeing, if we have a look here, that's why you're seeing simply one name instead of, bar colon foo and bar colon bar, for example. So that's why we do this little formatting here, so because we want to know what the current user is, and then basically what we do is that we do a little bit of a regex here. So we check, we have a match for the user, the current user's username, and then we simply replace. We go through the name of the channel, and we simply remove that name from our little channels list, because we don't need to know that we are, the current user doesn't need to know that that user is in that current channel, because hey, you already know that. You're interested in who the other people in that channel are. Right, so let's see here. So that's the channels, and basically the rest of it is mostly just changing, just things that we've moved from the app.js file over to this over here instead. So yeah, we set the channels after we've mapped over them, and then we simply find the channel that is currently selected, and we set that as well. Then we asynchronously go to the server and set the last visited channel. We get all the messages for the channel that we are currently routed to. So now when we switch the channel, we just get those messages. We set them, and then we have a new event that is called scroll to bottom. And all that's going to do is that it's going to reset the scrolling back to the bottom, so that when we hit a new channel, the window is going to hit the bottom, and we'll see the most recent message. So that's about it. Now let's have a look at the actual router itself, and this may get a little bit hairy for us, but I think we can muscle through, right? So we've created this router class where we have a bunch of helper functions. So basically what we're going to do here is that we're going to look, as we saw earlier, we have this add function, and that's just going to take in a URL template and a callback, and then we're going to store that on our routes object, because as we saw here just a moment ago, what we're going for is that we want to set this template, and then we want to provide a function that's going to be called whenever a route that matches this pattern is part of the, when we link to that route, basically. So let's just walk through it. So when we actually do a bit of, we've added this thing in here, we add this little listen function as well. So these are the only 2 public functions we have. Like this little underscore is a practice you may know of, which is just, hey, this is private, like don't use it externally. And so when we initialize with listen, which is, as you saw here earlier, this is exactly what we're doing. So we've called add our little route here, and then we start to listen for route changes. Then we simply add an event listener to the window object. So hash change, whenever the hash changes in the URL, we're going to call this function, and we will also call this function when we actually load the script to the page, because when we load the script, we want to simply evaluate if we are on the correct route, or if we are on a route, so we can actually fire off this event. And route, all it's going to do is going to grab all the routes, and it's going to go through all of the routes, and it's going to create a regex from this route. We can actually look at that here. So it's just going to replace this global this regex that's up here with this string instead. We're going to create groups from each regex, and that's going to match against, if we have a look here, it's going to match against this pattern here. So we're going to extract all of the names, or like the param names of the route itself. And when we have that regex, when that's been created, we are simply going to extract from the window location, like the hash. We're going to remove the first part of that, which is going to be the hash itself, and then we're simply going to extract like the actual path that follows. And then we're going to do a match on that on the URL, so that we are left with, if like all the parts that have matched. Then we're going to grab the param names. So we're going to just take the route, and we're going to do another match and globally match against all of this, and grab all of the strings, or rather the param names of each of the sections that we matched against. And then we slice off the first part, which is just going to be that colon, because what we want is the channel ID, this string here. We don't want this part here. And yeah, then we are left with the param names. Then we get all of the parameters. And the way we do that is basically, hey, we get the match, like everything that has been matched. And we grab all of the values. We ignore the first value, because when we do a match in JavaScript, the first value in the array that is returned is going to be the full path, like the full string itself. And everything that follows is going to be each section that has been matched against our regex. And then we loop over. I reduce all of the param names into an object that just has the name of the parameter, and that is going to be equal to the value. And then we're going to be left with an object that where every key is the parameter name, and the value is the value is the value of that name. And then we are going to create the URL from this. And the way that we do that is, let's see here, do I have this? Create URL. Yes, here we are. Sorry, there we are. So we're going to go through all the matches, and again, ignoring the first part. And then we're going to just grab all of the param values, and we are going to replace, well, basically we're simply going to replace all of the strings, like all of these like template strings, with the actual value itself. And the reason why we want to do that is because we need to compare them. As you see here, basically what we want to do is we want to convert this thing here into the actual URL itself, so we can compare if it's a perfect match. And if the URL we are currently on is a perfect match, when we have actually created a fully fledged URL from our template, then we know that we've actually found the URL, like we have a match, like we know that this is the URL that we are currently on. And then we set that this is the route to call, and we break. And then finally we simply check if there is a route to call. And if there is a route to call, well, we simply grab the parameters, and then we index into our routes, like where we store all our routes, and we call the correct function with the parameters that we have for that function. And we have a bit of a special case here, because if there is no hash, or if we've declared like a root handler, because that won't match against anything, we simply call that like the root action handler, or like the route handler instead, because yeah, it's this is basically the way we can check whether or not we've hit the root. Like if the user does this thing here, in essence, let's like actually do this. If I do that, you see that I'm actually immediately redirected, even though I went to the root of my page, like the actual root site. I'm actually redirected to the last channel that I visited, and we will look at that behavior later, but that's why we needed to add this part here. So I know that's a lot of information, but this is the sort of stuff that frameworks help you fix, and this is far from perfect, but it does the job fairly well. Alright, so enough about routing. Let's have a look at some things that has changed in the UI itself. So we have a few things that has changed here. So we see here, like when we go to the alerts direct message, like when we actually open this little box here, like this modal, and we're in this section here. So we've added a little bit of functionality for this. So let's have a look at that. So when we click one of the elements, we can actually look at one of the messages a little bit later, but basically what's going to happen is that when we click one of these elements, we are going to take in the event, the user to send the ID of the user we want to send a message to, and we're going to get the message name, or the user to message that person's name. And as I said earlier, the way that Slack actually does this is that we concatenate the creators, like the current user, who we are, with, and just add a colon here, and then we append the other user that we want to talk to. In the real version of Slack, we can actually add multiple users to the same direct messages channel, but for now, we're just going to stick with having one person and just having a one-to-one person discussion. And then we create the channel, and basically all we're going to do here, if we go into this little function here, we're going to see here that create channel is just basically going to take in the name, the users in the channel, and the type of the channel, and then we're just going to send a post. That's about it, really. And I see here that I have a few things that I need to, I forgot to remove some stuff, but hey, we'll take care of that later. So once we've created the channel itself, we're going to be left, we're going to get back the incoming channel, or rather the channel that has been created. We convert that to a channel that fits into our client-side client-side model, and then we emit. This is where the first direct message comes in. So now we emit an event to the user that we want to start chatting with. As we saw earlier, what's going to happen is that that person is going to receive this message, and they're going to connect and add that channel to their list of direct channels. Then we close the alert, and we simply redirect to this location, as like to the new channel that has been created. And yeah, that's about it, really. So let's have a look at, say, the chat component. So basically, we've added a few things here as well, where basically, as stated previously, earlier we didn't have this concept of a channel ID, so we just added in so that, you know, when you're typing, you actually specify which channel you are typing to. And then I just refactored here a little bit because I didn't need to use an emit. I could actually just use a send. So a little bit of refactoring there as well. Here's a little bit of logic where we, well, basically when we want to, because now when we have an incoming, well, basically when we have an incoming event where we want to set the messages, we needed to have a handle for that as well. So all I'm going to do here is virtually, we're going to set the messages. We can actually look a little bit closer at that because it might get a little bit confusing otherwise. So we've added a handle so that we can actually set new messages as they arrive, because remember now, instead of just having hard-coded messages as we had earlier, we're actually going to get them every time we change like when we change a route, we need to say that, hey, I want to set all the messages whenever we change, as we saw earlier in the route itself. It's going to get all the messages and simply set them. And all we're going to do is that we're going to remove all of the current messages that's in the window, and then we're going to loop over all of these messages, and we're simply going to create a chat list item, which is, you know, the actual posts, and then we're simply going to append them to the messages list. And that's really all there is to it. Not much more to it. And then we've added this part here, which we looked at a little bit earlier, where I simply added, okay, so if a user adds a message or there is an event called scroll to bottom, we're simply going to scroll the text area, this section here. Let's like this section here. If it is overflowed, it's simply going to scroll to the bottom when I specify that. And yeah, that's about it, really. Let's have a look here. We've already looked at this, and then we have added a bit of logic to adding a channel, because when a channel, like as we saw earlier, if we have a look at the socket channels here, so we send this add channels event when a user is sending us the first direct message, but we don't want to just, as a user can reinitialize or try to recreate the channel, or try to send a direct message multiple times, or try to create a channel with us several times. We don't just want to blindly accept it. So what we want to do is that we want, if we have a look here, we want to just check. So we're going to go through all the channels, and we're simply going to check if the channel that we're trying to add into the list is already in that list. If it is already in the list, we're simply going to return the state and not add it in. Otherwise, we will add it in, as we see down here. And then we've added a little bit of a change to the direct messages list. Is the only change that has happened here is that now we're no longer using an on-click, as we saw earlier. The sidebar component actually has this concept of sending a direct message, and that's exactly what's happening here when I'm actually clicking. I'm just routing, or rather, this is the part where, if instead of having an on-click here, we're simply going to use an href where all we want to do is that we want to link when the user clicks on one of the items in our direct messages list. So basically when as we saw earlier, when I click back and forth here, I just want to change the URL instead of having an on-click listener. And that's all that this does, basically. That's the main change here. And the same thing goes for like this direct messages list. So this component is just the item. So you click the item, it's going to change the route. And the only thing that's actually changed here is that we've added a few basically a few handlers for the different events. I'll just scroll through all of this because it gets a little bit, there's quite a ton of stuff that needs to happen in order for that to work. So basically, the main thing you can take away from this is that in order for us to change from having static information that is just hard-coded or is just on the page and doing this over a network, we simply have to have this concept of, okay, an event got dispatched, and now we want to simply re-render the current state of the DOM. So as we saw earlier, like adding a channel, because we can't just add it, we're going to just have to have a look and see if if we should add the channel. So in this example, we're going to get the length of the current amount, like the nodes that are already in our list element, and we're going to get the length of like the state that we hold in our store, and then we're simply going to check if there's a length difference. In other words, have we actually added a new channel? Yes or no? And then we're simply going to check if the type of this action is an add channel, and if there was a channel that was added. If that is the case, we're simply going to create a element like the list item, and then we're going to append append it to the list. So as you saw earlier, whenever somebody tries to start a direct message with us, we're simply going to check if that is a fresh message, and we're going to add it in if it is. And then we added a few of these, we changed these endpoints a little bit. Most of this has to do with simply adding IDs and types. So you can see here that creating a channel no longer just takes the name of the channel. We also actually check the users that are in the channel and the type, all that good stuff. And then getting a channel is a new thing. Basically, we're simply going to get as we saw earlier, getting the specific channel that we're after. And yeah, then we have this concept of setting a last visited channel, so that the server needs to remember, or rather we need to add to the user model every time somebody selects a new channel, so that we can, when they reload the page, know that, all right, we should show this channel. And yeah, I think that should cover basically. I added this little part here as well. This was just for debugging purposes. So to local storage, if I set the debug state or the debug item, I can refresh this, and when I actually go back, actually this is this browser instead. So I refresh here, and you can see here that now I actually get a little bit of a log output, so I can actually see which events are being fired as I interact with the page. And if I click things, it's actually going to, fire, and I can see what the values of those are. So just a little bit of debugging code for me. And I don't think we've already touched on these, and this video is dragging on a little bit. So yeah, this story was a little bit of an explosion in complexity, but sometimes you find yourself in that situation where you want to create one thing, and in order to create that one thing, you have to create 100 other things, and that's kind of where we are right now. So taking a JavaScript application from hard-coded values and actually getting data from the server and then adding routing and all this stuff there was quite a lot of stuff that needed to happen. But we can put this to ready for test now. And the next thing we're going to have a look at is simply listing the channels. So let's have a look at that.